and thank you to all of you for joining us. You know, at Union Square Practice, we recognize that this is a very trying time for just about everybody. And so we really wanted to find a way to contribute to what has to be the collective effort to get through this thing. So we decided to start this webinar to broaden our reach free of charge so that we could help as many people as possible at no cost. So we'll be here today, we'll be here in the coming weeks. We hope you find it beneficial and continue the conversation with us. As David mentioned, we'll want to hear from you throughout. We've got the poll. I think hopefully we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. And with that, I think we'll just go ahead and get started. So Fader, where I'd like to start really is asking you, what do you think is the most stressful part of this whole experience for people?
Well, Julia, I mean, I think for most of us, the most stressful part of this is the uncertainty. You know, as humans, the thing that we really struggle with the most is uncertainty, not knowing what's going to happen. And there's just such a high degree of uncertainty. We're all kind of, we'll talk about this later, but tapped into the news, constantly looking for information about the update as to what's going to happen. And so I think a lot of the ability to have skills around this comes in the ability to develop our mental strength and flexibility around uncertainty. It's really the game, if you will, or the thing that we're really battling is even more so than the virus, is the uncertainty about the virus.
Yeah, you know, I would agree with you. I think the uncertainty really, it seeps into every different aspect, right? You know, professionally, will my job be okay? Will my loved ones be okay? Not so much anymore. It's a little bit more clear now, but in the beginning it was, what should I do? Should I take the train to work? Should I send my kids to school? There was really a lot of, as you said, uncertainty. So that makes a lot of sense. Now, I know that you work a lot with athletes, with firefighters, with business leaders. What would you say that we can all learn from these high performers as far as how to manage this uncertainty and how to cope with the other challenges that are facing us now?
You know, it's funny, as you were saying that, I was just thinking about all the people I've talked to in the past couple of weeks from all of those groups: elite firefighters, first responders, people in business, athletes. And, you know, one of the things that when I was reflecting on talking to them, I was thinking there's a universality in all this. All those people from all those walks of life, they're all experiencing stress. And I think it's just helpful to know that, you know, almost every human on this planet is experiencing some degree of stress, and to think about that. I think that in itself, that awareness and that self-awareness can really be helpful to tap into that and say, well, you know, firefighters are stressed, they're working 24s. We're all experiencing this together. I'm not alone in the stress that I experience. That alone, I think, actually is a skill. And when I think about, you know, what helps all of those people, firefighters, you know, when they're going to a big job or a big fire, or athletes with the game on the line, or people in finance where they're losing a ton of money. You know, what we really focus on in performance coaching and mental performance coaching is one really central concept, which is to be able to understand what we control. And so that's a big focus of the work that we do, is to focus on what we control. And when I was with the Giants, we had actually a sign in the locker room that David's actually putting up here, which is that, you know, to focus on the things that we have a direct impact on. So controlling what you can control and playing the next play, and to be able to stay in the moment. And when I think about what skills are involved in managing stress at this time, it's really getting better and better at saying, you know, I'm going to be really trying to work towards mastering the moment. I'm going to try to develop a set of skills that's going to allow me to determine what I control versus what I don't control. We had an acronym that we would use in sports and that we use with athletes called APE. And APE stands for the things that you do control. You always control your attitude. So how you look at a particular situation, whether you see the things that are happening in your life as a threat or a challenge. I was reading an interesting piece about homeschooling, and the perspective was, this is not homeschooling, this is crisis schooling, right? So giving yourself a break about that and saying, you know what, it doesn't have to be perfect. That's a certain attitude that you'd have to it. Or seeing this whole thing, seeing the opportunities in all this, that's part of your attitude. And then also you control not only your attitude, but you control your preparation. So you control what you do, what are the activities you're doing every day. You control whether or not you attend a webinar. Do you take 30 minutes out of your busy day at home with all the things that you got going on to spend some time on your mental well-being, your mental strength and flexibility? And then E is effort. Do I put in just 5% more effort? I mean, this is what I experience now with trying to come up with workouts at home, right? Am I finding ways to put in 5% more effort to adapt to the situation? So really focusing, Julia, on controlling that ape. When your attention diverts to things you can't control, bringing your central focus back to things that are within your reach, specifically your mindset, your attitude, and what you do to prepare and the effort that you bring to each moment while you're at home.
You know, when I hear you talk about these things, what I keep thinking about is the difference between a focus on an outcome and a focus on sort of the process along the way, right? Because we can't always control the outcome. We can do everything right, and still the outcome, you know, we don't have ultimate control over it. But I like what you're saying about, you know, we can focus on our own mindset, right? The way that we approach situations.
No question, no question. You know, I mean, people talk a lot about anxiety or physiological arousal being fight or flight, right? When we're presented with something that's stressful, we either run, you know, or we fight. But, you know, the third option, which is what a lot of people, and sometimes we all do, actually is the most dangerous option, which is freeze. We all freeze. When there's something that we can't control, we kind of freeze. We see some news about this and we just get stagnant. And the ability to shift focus and say, you know what, when these things happen, I'm going to find something to do. I'm going to do something, and I'm going to have a way of finding a certain skill that I'm going to return to in all of these stressful moments.
Absolutely. And, you know, as we talk about a lot in cognitive behavioral therapy, the way that we think about things matters. The way that we talk to ourselves matters, right?
No question. No question. It brings to mind, you know, a quote I think about is people argue about where this is attributed to, but, you know, things are not as they are as we are. The idea that our perspective is what leads to the way we think about things, leads to or is connected in some way to our feelings, how we mentally respond to things, and that's a manageable skill. That's a trainable thing. Just like you can train your calves or your thighs or your quads doing squats, you can do squats for your mindset. You can do curls for your brain.
Mental gym. Very cool.
That's right.
So, okay, I also know that you talk quite a bit about routines and the benefits that they can have on our well-being and on really peak performance. So what can we do now that for most of us, our routines, you know, at a minimum are disrupted, and in a lot of cases they're completely derailed, right? What do we do now?
You know, I think everybody's routine is disrupted. Even if you are, you know, even if you're someone who's returning, you're a healthcare worker, you're returning to your job and you're going to the same place, everything looks different. And, you know, what we know just about humans' work is that the more that you can routinize your life in terms of your behaviors, likely your mood is going to be more regulated, and likely you're going to have more space. Sometimes I talk about this as mental real estate. The best way to find more mental real estate is to have a better routine. You know, we actually wanted to share with everybody on the call a video that we sometimes share in presentations about what an excellent routine looks like. Check out this race car situation and look Yeah, so you can see there, I mean, that's what a great routine looks like. A great routine has, you know, a plan. It's really well thought out. I mean, in this case, the great routine is collaboration, which comes into play in relationships and family moments. But essentially what a routine does is it allows us to take the pressure off. It allows us to focus on the things that we control and to minimize stress and the variability of this situation. There's so many things out of our control with this whole coronavirus situation, but our routine is one thing that largely we have an impact on. How we adapt our routine, given some of the major obstacles. So one of the major obstacles is, for example, that most of us are not leaving our house that much. So what do you do in your routine to help that?
Yeah. And so I think, you know, in the past, I've heard you speak about sort of different levels of routine. I've heard you talk about kind of larger scale routines and more sort of day-to-day routines. Can you tell us a little bit about what I know you refer to as macro and micro routines?
Sure. Yeah. I find that, just saying improve your routine isn't that as helpful as figuring out what are the different levels of my routine, and how can I adapt my routine to really focus on not only the big picture, which we call macro, but also the smaller moments in which I do feel stress, for example, around the situation. So in the macro or the general sense, I think it's helpful to do things that day by day build your mental strength and flexibility. So there are a million things that you can do to do that, but specifically the things that I think are within everybody's reach are, number one, the practice of mindfulness. So mindfulness, is a hard concept to cover in a 60-second description, but I'll just leave it at saying that, really for most of us, it's an ability to make contact and practice the acceptance of the present moment just as it is. It's really the ability to say, I'm going to get better at sitting with and accepting emotions that I have. And, there's never been, I think, for most of us, a more challenging time and a better time to practice this. And there are tons of resources out there that are very accessible. And most of them are becoming more accessible. But Headspace, Calm, these things where you can practice, as you said, a mind gym for you every day to take, at least 3 to 5 minutes. And what I think is, for people to do some mindfulness every day rather than none. So what I suggest to a lot of clients I work with, athletes, other performers, is just saying, I'm going to make a commitment to doing that a few minutes a day. And the other thing that I think is really, really helpful for me, for many people, is the practice of gratitude. For me, gratitude is really a verb. It's not a noun. You're practicing the act of realizing what's good. And I think people really struggle with this because there's so many things that are challenging now. But gratitude can be practiced at any time. It can be practiced even when there are things that you need to talk about that you feel anxious about. So, in our house, what we do is at bedtime we practice gratitude. So my daughters say 3 things they're grateful for, and then they demand that I say it back to them. And then actually at meal times, we just say something about the day that we appreciate. So actually, sometimes we do a game called Roses and Thorns, where you just say one thing that was great and one challenge for you of the day and how you overcame it. And there's so much science, Julia, as you know, that shows that having an active practice of gratitude builds so much resilience, not only for mental health, but also for physical. There's studies that show it has cardiac benefits. And so I think the ability to put that in the macro, that means something you do every day, regardless of how you're feeling. You're feeling anxious, you're not feeling anxious, whatever is happening in your life, you're practicing this aspect of gratitude. It's super protective for people. And then, taking it to the next level. I tell a story. Actually, I was doing a talk. I think it was in Vegas, and I was saying, okay, everybody, take out your phone and text someone that you feel grateful for. So everybody did. And I said, and if someone responds, let me know, text me back, or tell me and raise your hand. And this group is maybe like 200 people or 100 like there is on this call. And so some guy raises his hand and I said, oh, okay, what did you text? He said, well, I text my wife. And I said, oh, what did you text? I said, I was so appreciative of you, how you're a parent and you're also a working mom and you're doing so many things. And so what did she say? She said, are you drunk? So, there's this sense also that we're not doing it enough. Mm-hmm. And as we'll talk about, this is a great opportunity to shift your relationships. Yeah. Yes, we're all anxious. Yes, we're feeling stress. Yes, most of us are spending more time with our family and loved ones than we ever have, for better or for worse. There's a stress to that too. But switching that relationship and saying, I'm going to take these moments to focus on the practice of appreciating some things in spite of a lot of things being wrong or stressful.
Yeah. And you mentioned earlier, you said there's a lot of science behind this, and just to kind of let our viewers know what we're talking about there, from an evolutionary perspective, we're sort of wired to seek out or to notice the danger in our environment, right? And again, if we're thinking in evolutionary terms, which berry is going to poison me, which predator is going to attack me. Now, in the past, I don't know, maybe decade or so, we've got some data showing that we can almost, in a sense, sort of rewire, it seems, our brains. That when we have intentional gratitude practices, we can shift our focus. And people who have intentional gratitude practices um, have they show greater happiness, greater satisfaction. So there does seem to be a correlation there, which
No
is really
question. No question. I'm really glad you brought that up because it, goes back to this, why is this so bothersome, this situation? And one of the reasons it's so bothersome is it's really evolutionary that, we have this alarm system as you're talking about. We all have it, and actually what I think about it is I'm grateful for that because the reason we are here and the reason humans are populating this planet is because of that alarm system. It allowed us to run from predators, to fight danger, things like that. But in this time, well, while COVID is out there and we're all thinking about this virus, in our house, likely it's not there, right? It's outside, we hope. And to be able to say, wait a second, right here in my house, I'm okay right now. And that's actually part in my mind of mindfulness, is to be able to bring yourself back to the present. Humans are so focused on future oriented worry or what happens in the past. And one part of that rewiring is also, bringing it back to mindfulness, the ability to come back to the present moment and say, right here, right now, I'm okay. That type of self-statement, it can be really helpful to come back. That in itself is a skill, to realize, to have self-awareness and realize that alarm system is going off for me, and
Yep.
bringing it back and self-messaging.
Yeah, and I think the idea with the mindfulness apps that you talked about, like Headspace or Calm or any of the others, Insight Timer, there are lots and lots of apps. I think the idea is if we can intentionally set aside 3 minutes or 5 minutes or 10 minutes, whatever it is, each day to practice that awareness, to sort of train that mental muscle, then perhaps when we are in our sort of real lives and in those moments of stress, perhaps we will be better able to respond with intention, right? Rather than react mindlessly.
No question. I mean, and that's sort of the other part of a routine is micro routines. So we've been talking about macro routines, but micro routines are what you're exactly talking about, Julia, what you do in the moment. And so what we think about in terms of sports and other things is, generally speaking, people just react to stress. So something stressful happens. And for us these days, that could be just a different news alert. It could be, something that happens on the phone. It could be something a friend tells you, true or false, about what's happening. And we just react. So, the analogy I give for people is I say, how would you react differently? What would you do if I told you there was someone on the corner who is going to try to rob you? Well, I'd walk the other way. And so to be able to say, I know stress is coming, and these are the ways I'm going to walk the other way from stress. Stress is going to happen. And rather than to say, like, we'll just roll the dice here, a micro routine is something that you're doing when that stress is coming, to help you respond and not react to stress. So having a few things that you can do when that stress is coming, and a couple things we've already talked about, but I think for viewers and people who are listening in here, one of the things is just having a couple self-statements, things that you're going to say to yourself to direct your attention, right? So one way to think about this is you're building an internal coach for yourself, right? You're having someone, what would a coach say to you in that moment, right? They certainly wouldn't say to you, keep watching news. Like, you should, like, ramp it up that volume and dig in. Actually, you should see if you can get CNN and Fox and CNBC on all at the same time. No way, right? They wouldn't say, well, let's think about all the terrible things that could happen as a result of this news. No, your internal coach would say to you things that would help center you and focus you. So one of the things I say to myself, a self-statement, that's a micro routine, is win. And win stands for what's important now. I must have said that to myself, Julia, 100 times in the past week, right? Because my mind diverts to things. Oh, I'm honestly, even this webinar, right? We're thinking, oh, Union Square Practice, we're going to kick this off. This is going to be a resource for people. We're all excited about it, but there's also a fair amount of preparation and there's a fair amount of stress about it. But whenever I think about, oh, what's going to happen on the webinar, I just say, what's important now? And what's important now across this week was just the steps that it took for you and I to discuss it, to think about what would be helpful. And so similarly, in our day-to-day, whether it's parenting stress or stress about financial stress, to ask ourselves what's important now. And almost all the time when we're stressed, as we talked about, we're thinking about something that we can't control. It's future-oriented worry, right? And our ability to have a self-statement, something that we can do in the moment to bring us back can be really helpful. And the other thing is that's more of a cognitive strategy. The other strategies are to have an acceptance strategy, to just say, oh, it's okay. Like, I feel this way. That's all right. It's a natural feeling. As we said before, almost every human is experiencing it, and get interested in it. Where is this actual, is it a thought? Is it something I'm feeling in my body? And lastly, to have a physiological technique. So what we recommend is just taking a few deep breaths in through your nose for 3 seconds, out through your mouth, if you can, with, pursed lips, just extending your breath, breathing relaxed, deep breaths for a minute or so can be tremendously helpful at helping you to avoid chest breathing and tension, and help you to really bring that physiological arousal, that heart rate down, to be able to kind of mitigate or slow down that alarm that we were talking about.
So you mentioned the alarm system. Something that I talk about a lot with the people who come to see me is the idea that in these sort of stressful situations, sometimes it's a false alarm that's gotten tripped, right? Like if you talked about, oh, if somebody's on the corner and they want to rob you, that's a real alarm. But a lot of times there's something in our environment that makes us think there's danger when there's not, or it makes us think there's more danger than there actually is. So I talk about this idea of the false alarm, and it reminds me of when, you kind of open the door to a house and the alarm starts beeping, and you have to really quickly kind of punch in the code, right? And you're kind of like fumbling and like, oh my gosh, what is the code? I don't even remember. And you want to do this before the whole house wakes up and before it calls 911 and everything else. This breathing that you're talking about, that can be a way to sort of punch in the code and bring the whole thing down. Right?
No question. Right. So the right now we're all kind of pressing it. We're trying to press that code in, and the ability to do these micro routines and macro routines is really a way to help you to get better at that code. Yeah. It helps you to get better at the code that you're talking about, to be able to punch it in more quickly and relax yourself and focus on what you can control.
Very cool. Great. So I think that we are going to have a poll coming up, although I can't see the poll at the moment. Here it is. All right, so here we've got it here. What is causing you the most stress these days? So this is for everybody who's tuning in. Is it health-related worry? Is it not being able to see friends, family, and coworkers? Is it financial or job concerns? And I think that you can just go ahead and choose.
I'm really actually curious to see, how this comes out, because, I think me particularly, all of these things come up from day to day. But, it'll be interesting to see how people pick, if they have to say at the top of their mind, what is the thing that is most stressful to them?
Sure. Let's see. All right.
That's interesting. So it's pretty evenly split, but not be able to see family and friends and coworkers is top. I think just jumping in here, I was just going to say, you and I talked about this when we were prepping to see how much we were going to talk about this, and it's helpful to know, I think, that everybody's is doing this because are thinking of this at the top of their list, because I think there's so many things that we can do to really help that that worry or react to that. I mean, one of the things I think about is that this is where effort comes in, I think, actually, because what we tend to do is we say, oh, we're at home, there's not much we can do. And I think everybody here there's a big joke going around that basically now when you ignore someone, they know that you're going to ignore, they know there's nowhere you could be. But I think still then we tend to avoid when we get stressed. And so back to the routine, I actually think it's helpful, to have a regular, social time, social hour. I was really touched by, going up on the front of my house and everybody applauding for, people in service industries and people who are first responders, because I got to just see all my neighbors, and it took some effort to do that. So I think, finding ways to put that into our routine can be, particularly helpful at this time.
So what would some of those ways be? How can we stay connected when really the directive is stay apart, right? But be separate.
Yeah. Well, I think about this as social distancing, not emotional distancing. And so I think one of the things you can do is you can take a leap in your relationships. What I've done on phone calls and on FaceTime is to ask people kind of deeper questions that I didn't ask before. I've had incredible calls with people where when you talk about things, asking them open-ended questions. So just asking people things like, what are you struggling with the most?
Yeah.
Right. Rather than, I think what we revert to is, how are you doing?
Right.
Right. And everybody's like, good, good, good. So if you can move past that, move past how are you doing, and say, like, what's been the biggest struggle so far? Or, hey, what have been the highlights? Back to that roses and thorns question, what's the thing that surprised you the most in this? Taking that step, it might feel awkward at first, but those things I think are tremendous. And the other thing is playing games. My parents, who are probably one of the 108 people listening here, are, what they do is they read plays. And so they've engaged us in that too a lot. So they just take plays off the wall. You can download them, and they read plays back and forth, playing different characters. You could do it with movies.
Oh, they act them out. Like
They act them out. They act them out. They act them out. Yeah, they're acting out the parts of the plays. And I think, finding ways to do something that, you don't really typically do. I mean, this, I know we're sort of running out of time. We want to get a couple questions in, but I'll just say one thing as we start to wrap up, which is, there's this idea of a growth mindset, right? Which is that, when we have stress, there's kind of two ways to respond to it, right? We can think, here's how I'm in danger. Here's the threat, which is what we tend to do in a situation like this. Or we can say, what's the opportunity here? What's the challenge? How can I get better? And I really think that this is an opportunity for all of us to find ways to say, well, what is one way I can get better today? What's one thing I could do in my life to get better? Or what's one thing I can do for another person? And that's the genesis for this webinar that we're going to be running every week, is to say, as a practice, we thought, what's one thing that we could do for people? Where there's a lot of things we can't do. We can only do virtual sessions. We can't, but what's one thing we can do for people? And even in doing that, I feel less stressed and, feel more meaning, which is really the goal of all this.
I like that idea of picking sort of one thing each day that you can do, or you can focus on, to make today a little bit better than yesterday. Especially in a time like this when we might be in for